Okay, so for today's work, I want to start by downloading the project. So let's go ahead and let's do Monday, April 2nd. Database modification, I'll follow that link. I'll follow the link to the assignment. And we'll have to download a few different files here. Actually, I'm kind of glad at least to be doing this part, because this next part's not quite especially clear in the assignment. There are 3 files here, all of which you need to download. So the XLSM file, that you're used to that, right? That's the file you've got to work with. I'm going to create a folder just for what I'm doing here. So new folder. It's like a great color scheme. I don't know who thought of this in Microsoft, but there's new folder, barely visible. New folder. Call it database project. I'm going to save that file. I'm going to download the data.zip. You may remember this is the 48 or 50 different files that have the data in it we have to get into the database. And then this is actually the database. Now, one little warning here about the database. This is a Microsoft Access database, but it's a .mdb file rather than the current file format is a .accdb. So that's like Microsoft database, the other one is Access database. So what you don't want to do, you're going to have to change the name of this because it's going to append your name on the end. Oh, you can change it right now. That's probably the best thing to do. Get your name off of it while you delete it or while you're downloading it. But if you open this up, a tendency that some folks have, I'll just open it and I'll do a save as and save it as some other name. If you do that, it's going to update it to a different version of the database, of the Access database, and the code won't be able to find it. So you've got to rename it through the file system or rename it while it's downloaded. So yeah, once you see it there, don't open it to Access and try to do a save as to get the name. That's an approach that will cause you pain.
That's just data zip.
I'm going to do the same thing. That's actually the university crime I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
But data zip as well. Let's go ahead and I'm going to take my name off of this one before I extract it. That'll make my life a little bit easier. I can leave my name on the Excel file. That's kind of what it's designed for anyway. So now, as I look at this, at this zip file, this is also a little bit confusing. That looks like a folder with a zipper on it, but it is not a folder. It is a single file. We had a whole bunch of files in a folder, and we said, let's take all these files and make them into one file so we can download them more easily. And then once they're downloaded, we can extract it. So is this a folder right now? It's not a folder at all. It is a file. The operating system tries to treat it like a folder. If I double-click it, it'll go, oh yeah, I can look inside that file and show you what files are in there if you were to extract it. But right now, it's just a file. So I'm going to hit Extract All, and that should actually make a folder out of that file. It will extract the individual files, put them into a folder, and then here we go. So I'll go back to my database project. Here's my folder. My data.zip is still there. I don't need this one anymore. I'm going to delete it. And so now I have a folder. It's a real folder. Double-click it, and I can see those files individually. The folder is named data, no other name on it. The database is named universitycrime.mdb, no name in it. And it's okay if I have my name in my Excel. It turns out that I can set whether or not your names get appended to these files, but it's a course level setting. So for this whole course, when you download a file, either your name goes on it or it doesn't. I don't have the ability to control it at this point. All right. So once we've got the data set up like this, we're ready to start working on the project. I know some of you are probably still getting this data down, so while you're doing that, I'll say some things that really aren't that critical. So let's just take a look at the data. I'm going to open up the universitycrime.mdb file. You don't need to do this. You can if you want, but I'm just going to kind of come in and take a look at the data that we'll be working with. So our goal is to take the data out of those individual Excel files and then bring the numbers into this database in the right format so that we can do further analysis on it. So when I look at this, I've got a report year, a state, a school, a campus, and then a data label and the value. So this says In 2010, at the Anchorage campus of the University of Alaska, there were 17,276 students enrolled. There was 1 reported incident of assault, and 2 burglaries, and 111 larcenies. What's the difference between burglary and larceny, by the way? I don't think it's dollar value. I think burglary means someone has entered into a building to be able to do it. Larceny is just theft. So someone walks by and swipes your computer when you're not looking. I think that's larceny. Someone breaks into your dorm room and steals your computer. I think that's burglary.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I think if someone points a gun at you and says, "Give me your computer," that's robbery. So they have these different categories here: larceny, burglary. Anyway, so that's what we've got to do. Probably would make sense for us to kind of look at one of the data files. Let's go ahead and look at something like, I don't know, let's look at California. California's opening, I think. So the data is not in a format that I could just say, I could just import this data. I'm going to have to parse through this and figure these out. So if we think about that row we looked at for Alaska for the enrollment, I've got to be able to formulate a structured query language statement that will enter data something like this. So I've got to say, all right, here's the state in A2. Here's the year, the last 4 characters of A4. I'm going to have to get this college name, no campus in this case, and then say enrollment is this number. And then execute that query. And I got to build another one. It's all that same stuff, and it says murder is this number. Oh, by the way, do I have to insert the 0 if there's a 0? What do you think? First of all, look at the data that's here. Do I insert records with 0?
Yes.
Yeah. The assignment is going to tell you something like, hey, if there's no data, don't insert it. But is 0 data or is 0 no data?
0 is data.
0 is data. Yeah. No data means if the cell's blank, there's no reason to insert that record, because that means we don't know what the number is. In fact, if you look at this data, every other column here except the data value is just giving context to the number. So I've got a number here, 113. What does that mean? Well, it's burglary on a particular campus, of a particular school, in a particular state, in a particular year. All the rest of these just give context to the number. If we don't know the number, it makes absolutely no sense to even have this row in the database. Does that make sense? Well, I said it makes no sense. There's no reason it should be there. I hope that makes sense. So that's going to be our task, and it is no small task. But we're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting today right here in class. And you'll have it here on the video. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the assignment file. Analysis. It's opening. I think it's opening. Enable editing. Enable. Now, I think you guys have figured this out by now, but a couple of things to show here. So I now have 2 other files showing up here. So one is this, starts with a tilde and looks like an Excel file, but it's tiny. This is a file that Excel uses for keeping track of what changes I've made, so it has to recover. My work, it can recover my work. Ignore that. But there's also another access file. This can be a little bit confusing. It's right here. It has an extension of LDB. Now, if you're not showing file extensions, it just looks like 2 files of the same name. So let me help you show your file extensions. You should be showing file extensions. Perhaps your mother shouldn't be showing file extensions, but you should be. You know enough not to change the extension on a file just because you don't like the way those 3 letters look to you. You leave those files the way they are. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come to my View tab. I'm going to come over here to Options. I'm going to come to the View tab again. I'm going to find the one that says Hide Extensions of Known File Types and uncheck that. That will make your life a little bit easier, so when you're looking at these 2 files, you can go, oh, one's an MDB and one's an LDB. Let me just tell you about what that LDB file is. I'm not sure you really need to know, but let me tell you. If I have multiple people working on the same database, that's the thing about a database, it's designed for multi-user concurrent access to the data. What happens if I'm working on this file and Matt's working on this same file? Could he connect to this file on my machine? Yeah, depending on where the network's set up, he certainly could. What happens if I'm editing a record at the same time Matt's editing a record? That's a problem. And so the database engine keeps track of which records I'm editing and which records Matt is editing in this file called LDB. It's the lock file. It's keeping track of which records are locked. And that's why you'll notice, even though the database is pretty large, 3 megabytes, or 3 megabytes, not huge, but the lock file is tiny. It's just a little flag saying which records are currently being edited by who. Don't delete it. It'll go away automatically when you close access. But just realize that's what that is. All right, go ahead.
Is it bad if it doesn't have the one on the bottom? When I have mine open?
If this one's not, if you're not showing this one, I think it's also another setting about, this is probably a hidden file, and I said show hidden files. If yours isn't showing, that's probably okay. So yeah, I'm going to come to options. I probably said something like show hidden files. Hidden files, show hidden, yeah, I'm saying to show hidden files. If there's a file there, I want to see it. There'll be hidden files from me. Okay. So you'll notice the grader isn't here yet, and of course, as soon as you do something that requires the activity of the grader, like show the instruction sheet, first step is going to be download the grader, put it there in that folder, and then the grader is the one that actually knows how to show the instruction sheet. So now that I've done that, I should go back here and see there's the crime analysis grader, also in the same location. And that sometimes happens. I'm not sure why. Some of you have no doubt experienced this. My workbook just disappeared. I mean, I watched it go away. Fortunately, I still have Excel open. I'm not sure what's causing it to do this. No doubt it's my code. But it's just hidden. So come to unhide, and there's the, if yours went away, you can unhide that file. Feel free to unhide the grader if you want. The only reason I hide it is because I don't want you to think, oh, this is something I have to deal with. Nothing you have to do with the grader, but I am going to go ahead and unhide my analysis assignment as well. So if your workbook just kind of disappears inexplicably, view, unhide, and then go get it. Come on, view, unhide, and then that's the list. Again, feel free to open that grader and look at it, but it's just one more thing to have open to worry about. This is why I hide it. Okay, let's just take a look at some of the existing tools. The idea on this assignment is that you are building part of a more comprehensive solution. So if I look at, we've got here an import data button. The idea is that sitting in that Access database, we've got a bunch of records. We want to bring them into Excel to be able to do some analysis on. And that's what the import data button does. So I'm going to click that, and it's just going to read that data in from the file. It's doing it one record at a time. We can do this a lot faster with, what was the statement that we saw for arrange copy from record set? There's a method for that. At the time, that method wasn't in all the access, in all the versions of Excel, so I decided to do it line by line. It's taking longer than I wanted to. But I don't think I can stop it, so we'll let it go. So one of the tools you have is just to import the data. So the nice thing here is that if you don't have Access installed, you don't really need Access installed to look at the data because you can import it and see what data is currently in the Access database. Do you have to have Microsoft Access installed on your computer to be able to write to a Microsoft Access database from Excel? The answer is no. So the driver that you have, the driver built into Microsoft Windows lets you do that even though Access isn't installed. So, so do you not have Access on your computer?
Well, I do.
Oh, you do?
I was just guessing.
The answer is no. That's correct.
So I don't know if you will get this, but like when I click the import, it says debug.
Okay, so if you click import and it says debug, chances are it's not finding the file that it expects to find. So there should be a file called universitycrime.mdb, and when you downloaded that, it probably appended your name to it. And so you have to rename that University Crime database to not have your name in the file. Once you change that, it'll be okay. I recommend you don't run it because it's going to take probably a couple of minutes for it to finish running. And we're about to move on.
23,000 records.
What's that?
There are 23,000 records.
It does take a little while. There's 2 records here. 23,000. 23,164. Now, if you had actually run some of your code, what this project does, it says, go read these Excel files. Push these records into the database, so the next time you do an import, and the truth is, the project never requires you to import the data. But if you were to import it again, you'd have more records. You'd have more than these 23,164 records. Now, my guess is that for most of you, you're going to insert a few records. You get some code going, you'll insert some records, but the chances of it running completely correctly the first time you run it is almost 0. It is really nicely approximated by 0. And so it would be nice to have some way just to be able to clear off all the bad data that you put in, or the good data that you put in, but it's just only partially there. Well, good news. Right here on the assignment tab, there's a reset data. So this just executes a query against the database that says, delete everything that has an observation ID above 23,163. So after you've done some inserting, you can just come here and say, all right, reset the data, and then you're back to where the database started when you download it. Now, process file, build pivot. This should be not too interesting since you already know how to build pivot tables, but it just builds a pivot table on that data. Again, you don't really need this for the project. It's just to kind of show you what it kind of, to give this project a little more fuller feeling. Why would you be inserting data in? It's because this is data that we do some analysis on periodically, bring in some more data, let's see what the numbers look like now. Again, you don't need to ever run that, but it's there as an example. But this one, process data files, this is the one that you're building. So right now, if I execute that, it just brings up the little yellow box that you're familiar with. Hey, go do the work. Run it again, it should get rid of it. And so let's go take a look at the code. All right, so I'm open. Oh, there's the grader, and there's my workbook grade. I'm going to come to the solution. Oh, solution's already open. Usually when I build code in to a project, I hide it over here in the Ribbon X module. So we have Ribbon X, don't make any changes here, and it looks like there's nothing here, but there's a bunch of white space, and then other stuff that I've done to kind of make the rest of the project go well is here. But in this case, the clear data, the one that's behind the button here that says reset data, so you know what? That is almost exactly what they need to do to be able to run an insert statement. It's a delete statement. This statement connects up to the database. It says execute this structured query language statement that deletes a bunch of records. It's almost exactly what you have to do because you're going to say connect to the database and execute a structured query language statement that inserts a bunch of records. Well, it's actually going to insert one record, but you're going to do it thousands and thousands of times. You really will run thousands of queries by the time you're done writing this assignment. That's the magic of loops. You write the loop will do it thousands of times. Okay, but let's just take a look then at what clear data does. I've tried to give you some comments to show you what these different blocks of code are doing. So we're declaring a long integer, number of records affected. We're declaring a string, structured query language, or SQL, as a string, and a connection as an ADODB connection. This should look pretty familiar from Monday's class. Now we're opening the connection and we're telling it, what, we're going to use the Microsoft ACE driver. The source is going to be this workbook.path, concatenated with a / universitycrime.mdb. That's why it has to be named University Crime. If your name's in there, this part's going to fail. And we've got the semicolon on the end. That gets the connection open. We define the structured query language statement. We're not doing anything with the delete statement, but I think you'll pick it up pretty quickly. Delete from crime data, that's the table, where observation ID is greater than 23,163. So the next time you add a record in here, it's going to get a new observation ID automatically. The database management system will plug that on for you. And so it'll have a higher number than the one that's there. It'll delete everything you've added. That's just setting up the query. Here's where we're executing. On that connection, execute that SQL. Now, we're also passing a variable called records affected. And this is actually something different than we've ever done before in class. This is, it's a little bit of a trick. Typically, when you get a value back from a function, it returns the value, right? You have to set a variable equal to the function to be able to capture that value. But here, this is almost mind-melting, unless I take a minute to explain it. So let me go ahead and explain it. There's another neat trick. Let me come here to a blank sheet. So let's suppose that we've got memory here. I've got some variable, and here it's called records affected. I've got a variable called records affected. And it's just sitting right here, somewhere in memory. Of course, it's not on the worksheet. This is just trying to represent what's in memory. But it's a long integer variable. Now, I'm calling some function called execute. And execute is saying, listen, I've got room for you to give me a parameter here. Typically, the way we think of parameters, let's suppose I put 22 right here, and I passed this to records affected. I'm not sure what the name of this argument is. Oh, it's actually called records affected. It'd be better if I had a different name. Let me go ahead and, I'm going to leave your code the way it is. I'm just going to change this to RA. I'm going to change this to RA. My local variable is called RA, and I'm using it somewhere else down here. So I've got a variable called RA, and right now it's got the value 22 in it. Now I'm making a call to this method, this execute method. It says, hey, give me a variable, give me a string to execute, a query to execute, and also tell me the number of records affected. So normally you might think, if I'm thinking about the variables that are happening inside that function, let's see what the names of those are. One of them is called command text, and one of them is called records affected. So if I were to look inside that function, I've got another variable here called command text. And I've got one called records affected. And I had some other one here called SQL. So let me go ahead and make that one. So here in my local procedure, we've got SQL, and there's something like delete from something, or select. All right. So when I pass a variable to a parameter, right? This parameter that's defined in the function, it really is a variable. So it's tempting to think, well, what happens is I take this value, I assign it to this location in memory. I take this value, I assign it to this location in memory. And even though I had different variables out here, I've got like this value is now sitting in different locations in memory. That's not what happens. What happens is the interpreter looks at this and it says, oh, you know what? If you had, let me move these to the location. It's saying, if you gave me something that was like a constant or a literal, it really would allocate memory for this and make a copy of those values. But it looks at this and it goes, hey, wait a minute. That's already a variable. That is already located in memory sometime. Why would I allocate more memory just to put a copy of that? It's already in memory. And what it does is it says, aha, I'm going to do this because I can, and because it's faster. I'm just going to say this is a nickname for that location in memory. And this is a nickname for that location in memory. So the strange thing here is that if this code, where I'm running the procedure, if it changes what's in records affected, will it also change what's in RA? Yeah, because it's two nicknames for the same location in memory. And so typically when we pass a parameter, when we send a value to a function, it's because that function needs that value to know what to do. But in this case, we are passing it strictly so that when it's done doing what it can do, it will set the value of its records affected variable, and I will be able to access that value out here. It's backwards from the way that we have used parameters since the very beginning of this class, well, whenever we started using parameters. And so you can think of this as an output parameter. I'm giving it a reference to a variable because I know it's going to set a value there and I want to be able to look at it. In fact, you'll see this. I'm going to go ahead and run the statement. I'm going to delete. Reset the data. The statement succeeded. However, there were no records to delete. So it figures that out based on what value it sends back to this parameter. You don't really need to understand what I just went through to be able to do this project. But it's an unusual use of parameter, and that's what's going on. So that executes the query. It then drops into this variable how many records were affected. We close the connection. Suppressed message here is just for convenience in working with the grader. And then it looks at what has been returned. It should be all right. Records,
You still have records effective in else if.
I do where?
Else if. Sorry, like right after else if.
Oh, else if R, I think.
Why do we have to close the connection again after it's been?
So the question is, why do we close the connection? And the answer is, when we open up that connection, it's actually maintaining a communication channel with the server. It's consuming resources on my machine. It's consuming resources on the database machine. And so we close the connection to say, hey, I'm done talking to you. You were using some memory to keep track of that channel of communication. Release that memory and go on with whatever you do. Okay, so that's what's happening. And the truth is, this is so painfully close to what we have to do. I'm going to start by making a copy all of this data. I'm just going to take this whole thing. We're going to delete some of it. It's more than we need. So up here, process data files, that has to go through all the files in that folder. And we have an example from not too long ago where I think we even processed this same set of files. So don't do this from scratch, go find that one. And similar to what we did in that example, instead of trying to integrate the actual work into the same file or the same subprocedure, I'm going to make a new subprocedure here just called process 1. It's going to take a path to a file. And then I'm going to paste in the copy of everything that we had from the clear data subprocedure. We're going to go through and get rid of what we don't need here. I guess we'll do that right now. So each time you run an insert statement, it is going to affect one record. It is going to insert one record. And so we do not need to have records affected. We don't need to know how many records were affected. So I'm going to get rid of that. I still need to open a connection. This connection will open exactly the same way. I will need some SQL. It won't be this SQL. When I execute the query, I don't need the records affected, so I'll get rid of that parameter. I'll close the connection, and then the rest of this is specific to working with the delete. So I'm not going to put up some message, oh, that would be annoying. You just inserted a record. Thank you. You just inserted a record, because it's going to run thousands of these. So don't be putting a message box up. So that's going to be our starting point. So now let's talk about what the SQL is going to look like. So I give that to you in the assignment. So let me come back and look at the assignment. Am I looking at the assignment right? Come back to me. Guess not. Assignment, show the instruction sheet. Hello, instruction sheet.
So he's asking you.
Oh, here we go. This is delightful. Are you sure you want to keep using Chrome? Wouldn't you rather use a Microsoft browser? No? Now I've lost it a little bit. Yes, keep using always. All right. So here is the insert statement that we need. Now, this is, of course, filled out for a particular insert, but that'll be a kind of a better starting place. So let me come here and replace my delete statement with my insert statement. And it's kind of wide, so I'm going to break it onto 2 lines. You can do it on 1 line if your screen's wider, you don't mind scrolling. Okay, so I guess I just need to pass a file. Why don't we go ahead and work with California? It's a file that's got a lot to recommend it. So let me see if I can find out how to get to that path. This workbook, concatenated with a \data \California .xlsx. Yeah, that looks like a pretty good reference to that file. So what I'm going to do in my process data files, clear out my notes that I have here, and I will just call process 1 and pass it that file. So just for testing, I'm going to work with California. Ultimately, you'll have to put code in here that finds that folder and processes all of them one at a time. But for now, we're just going to be processing 1. So I'm not doing anything with the path yet, but this will get read into the path variable. We'll use that to open a workbook. But I just want to test it to make sure this part's working. We're opening a connection. We're trying to insert, or setting up a structured query language statement to insert a record, executing that query, closing the connection. I think that should insert that record. It's not a very helpful record because it's static. But I should be able to come back over here to access, refresh this data, go to the end and see that record. Yep. So we end here in 2006, and now we've got the 2011 record from Arson at the University of Utah. So that's good news. That means this code is working to actually connect to the database, insert a record, and close the connection. So the database part of this is humming. It's feeling pretty good. So now we have to start actually working with the data. Our next task is going to be say, all right, we've got to open up one of those files. We've got to figure out what the values should be for the first insert statement, and then the next insert statement, the next insert statement, and so on. So let's go ahead and open up the file. So I'm going to declare an object variable, WB, as a workbook. Truth is, I could do this assignment without ever binding the workbooks I open, without ever binding them onto a variable. Because when I open that workbook, it's going to become the active workbook. So I can say, based on the active workbook, do this, active workbook, now I'm ready to close the active workbook. But the reason I dislike just relying on the active workbook is that while I'm running that code, if someone comes up and clicks on a different workbook, all of a sudden I've got a different active workbook. And this is going to be long-running code. This code might take a couple of minutes or several minutes to be able to run. And so I want to make sure that I know exactly the workbooks I'm dealing with. So I'm going to set WB equal to workbooks.open, and I'm going to open the path. So whatever path gets passed in, right, I'm passing this full path in to process 1. Calling process 1, this value is going to get dropped into this variable, And I'm using that variable now to be able to open the workbook. So we're then going to open the connection, execute the query, execute the SQL, close the connection. So maybe it's down at the very bottom here. I'm going to go ahead and close this connection. I'm sorry, going to close the workbook. So wb.close. I don't care which workbook's active. I've connected on a variable to that workbook, and that's the workbook that I want to close. Now, there's actually a parameter here to save changes. And if I haven't made any changes to the file, it doesn't really matter. I say close, it'll close, everyone's happy. But if I made a change to this file, and I say close, without telling it whether I want to save the changes or not, what's it going to do?
Ask you.
It's going to ask the user, you want to save these changes? And what's the answer? I don't want to save these changes. This is just, I'm reading the data to be able to get into the database, so we'll set false. The truth is, I am going to modify these files while they're open just for convenience in, I'm going to change the organization a little bit just so I can work with the data more easily. But I don't want to save the changes I'm going to make. I'll make the changes again next time I open. And the whole idea is, I'm trying to read a file format that the FBI is going to send me next year. I don't want to save the changes and then have different code that reads them after it's changed. Open up that file, process it, close it, and read it. Okay. Well, first thing, let's look at the first thing we have here. So we've got this year, 2011. So right now, that year, 2011, is hard-coded in this SQL. I need to be able to read that off of California. So where am I going to get it? Yeah, it's the last 4 characters of A4. So let's just do that. That's not too hard. So I'll declare a variable to hold that. Dim, I'll call it report year. Dim report year as, I think as a string. And ultimately what I'm doing is I am building a string. And so even though that report year could be a number, probably could even be an integer, I'm not going to do math with it. I'm manipulating strings. I think I like it better as a string. All right, now I've opened the workbook. How am I going to get to that worksheet? I can't just say workbook.cells A4 because workbook doesn't have a cells method or a range method. I got to get to the sheet. So what's the name of the sheet? Active sheet. We could probably do, I think we could do workbook.activesheet. There's only one. It has a name here, but I look at that name and I think it's got a CA, which probably means California. It's got 11, which probably means the year. That's going to change with every file.
It's code name.
What's that?
It's code name.
Oh, let's look at its code name. That's a good idea. Its code name is sheet 1. That might be the simplest way to do it. But why don't we do it this way? Let me go ahead and dim S as a worksheet. Let me set S equal to wb.sheets, and several of you said this, sheets number 1. There's only one sheet. Let's just bind the local variable onto that first sheet. And now we can just refer to that as S. We'll make our code a little bit shorter. This will be handy since my screen's not very wide. All right, so now I'm ready to read that value into report year. Report year equals S dot range, what was it, A4? Dot value, but I don't want the whole value from that cell. What do I want? The rightmost 4 characters. So now I've now read that into a variable. And I think I've got that part good. Actually, it might not be a bad place to put a breakpoint here and open the connection. I'm going to run this and just see, let's see, process data files. I'm going to see if that got my report year. Doesn't look so good. Report year. Is it A4 that I'm looking for? Yeah, it didn't work for me. That's embarrassing. Let You see what's on s.a4. Set s equal to wb. We see what's going on here. wb.name should be California. Oh, crime analysis grade. Somehow I got the wrong path. Let me stop this and try it again. I'm going to make sure I run this one. Let's see what the path is. Path looks opposite. WB.sheets1. Why is WB getting set to the current order? All right, so I closed the file, and now when I ran it, it opened it. I'm still not sure why it bound on to the analysis to the grader with the prior version. But now, that workbook's there. I should be able to look at my report year. Report year is holding 2011. So far, so good. So now, what I need to do is find a way to get that report year in here. Now, it's already 2011, so this is going to seem a little bit anticlimactic, but the point is, the grader may very well put in a different year's data to be able to grade. You've got to be able to look at that and read that number in. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set this up as a parameter. My SQL starts here. Let me go ahead and change, it's 2011, I'm going to just change this right here in the query to something that I can replace. So I'm going to put it as, I'll put it as report year. Maybe I'll just put it as year. So now, before I get to the executing, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this comment in here. But before I get to the executing, I'm going to need to replace that report year. I'm going to have to replace this tag with the value I have in the variable report year. So I'm going to come right here and just say SQL is going to equal replace, look at SQL, look for something, replace it with something. What am I looking for? I'm looking for year. Case is going to matter. And I'm going to replace it with report year. So now it's going to find this report year. It's going to replace it with 2011, and then that will execute the query with the right value. I'm going to need something similar for the state. So I'm going to come here. Now, you'll notice that my report year did not have quotes around it. Just like in VBA, if I want to do something with a numeric literal, I don't need quotes. I can say just print 2011, it goes great. I can print 2011. But if I'm going to print a name, it has to know, oh, that's a string literal. You've got to put quotes around it. It's the same thing in VBA. For this numeric value, no quotes are necessary. But for this character, it's the same thing in SQL, but for this character value, I've got to have those quotes around. So you're going to be very careful to make sure that you leave the quotes in place that I have in this example template. And I'm going to parameterize this one as well. So I'll get rid of Utah, and I'll put in a tag state. I'm going to, let's see, so let me make sure you still got that if you're trying to follow along. So state here is where I plug that in. And now I'm going to declare myself a variable up here. I've got report year. I'm going to make one called state as a string. And while I'm at it, I'll make a few more. Campus as a string. As a string. Dim. What else do we have? I guess that's enough for now.
So why does state have single quotes around it and not year?
So the question is, why does state have single quotes and not year? And the answer is, just like in VBA, if I want to be able to do something with a numeric literal, no quotes are needed. I can just say print 2001. It goes, okay, great, 2001. It's just the value 2001. If I want to do a string variable or a string literal, I've got to put quotes around it. The reason is that without the quotes, VBA looks at this and tries to figure out what it is. Is that a variable? Is it the name of a function? Is it some object it doesn't know about? it has to wonder what that is. And we're saying, no, it's just a collection of characters. It's just that. Don't try to understand it, it's just those characters. Same thing in SQL. It's exactly the same pattern. If it's a number, SQL can look at it and go, or the SQL interpreter can look at it and go, oh yeah, number. There's no reserved words that start with a number. That's a number. But over here, because it's going to be, like California, it's going to think, is there some function named California? Can I have functions in SQL? Yeah, I can make functions in SQL. There's a lot we can do with SQL. It's a programming language. Not that dissimilar from VBA, but fundamentally different. So it's the same thing. Did that answer the question? So now I've got the parameter for the state. I've got a variable for the state. I'm going to go ahead and replace the query with the state. I'm going to get my query going here. So change my tag with my state variable. The only thing I have to do now is I've got to actually give a value to the state variable. So let's take a look. Oh, state looks easy. It's an A2. That was easy. So I'm doing the report here. I'll do the state here. State equals, and I'll just do A2. So I'm reading the value off the worksheet and plugging it in. You're going to find out that in some cases, your state names have footnotes on the end. You're going to have to get rid of that trailing number. I'll show you how to do that today as well. But since the one we're working with, California, doesn't have it, let's not worry about it yet. One more thing. Yeah, so now, instead of executing this, I think I'm going to put a comment in front of my execute statement. And I'm going to do a debug.print of the SQL. That way I can just kind of see what it's generating. So at this point, when I run it up to here, and I'll leave my connection open, I'll hit the breakpoint here where I'm closing the connection. I'm not trying to execute the query, but I should be able to see that I have plugged in the 2011, I've plugged in California, and we should be good. Just from an abundance of caution, I'm going to close California before we start, and then I'll run my procedure. Oh, we've got a breakpoint here. And takes that breakpoint off, and run to the next one. And then here it's given me my insert statement. Insert into crime data, 2011 and California. Plug in just the way I want it. Very nice. Questions on how we got here? How are we doing? Question?
So how come it doesn't work if the workbook, the California workbook is open already?
Yeah, the question is, why isn't it working if the California workbook is open? And the answer is, I think it should. I'm befuddled by that. Oh. So it's saying it's trying to open that workbook, and I really think it should. Let me try it again. I'm going to run process data files, and let me see what wb.name is. Yeah, that actually looks like it worked that time. I'm not sure what was going on before. Yeah, it worked just fine. So there was some little hiccup in Excel. I'm not sure.
So there's no error then if workbook is already open. You try to run the open method on it, it'll still open.
Yeah. So the question is, if it's already open and you say open it, yeah, what happens is the open method goes, wait a minute, it's already open, and it will just return a reference to that workbook. Now it will do something else. Let me stop it here. And let's suppose I had some changes made to this. Let's say I got rid of the word campus in here. Now when I run this, it's going to say, hold on a second, cowboy. Let me stop this. I think it's going to say, hold on a second. Never mind. I've seen it prompt and say, hey, if you open this again, it's going to make that change. So, yeah, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'm not sure why it's behaving that way. But yeah, it just binds onto that open workbook. Okay, there was a question over here.
I have a runtime error.
The TA is on his way. Okay, so we've got year and state. That's the easy ones. So now, if I think about the next query I'm going to have to execute, I got to come here and pick up Allen Hancock College. I got to say enrollment, and I got to say $12,000. Those are my next three things, yeah? Or 12,000 people. Let's see. Yeah, I got to pick up the name of the university. There's no campus, enrollment, and what that number is. So some more things to work with. And this now is going to be a little bit more complicated because I've got to be set up, for this file, everything in this file is California. For this file, everything is 2011. But now I'm going to have to do some for this college, some for this college, some for this college. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a loop that'll loop through these colleges. And so I'm going to create a control variable. I'll just call it R. And R as a long integer. We're going to start R at 6, I believe. Starts at row 6. So we're going to come in here. Maybe we'll do it right after we open the connection, but before we define the SQL. We're going to say R equals 6, and we'll do a do loop. Do and loop. We're going to have to put this loop around the other code we have down here, but let me get it working to this point first, and then we'll bring this other code into it. R equals R plus 1, do events. Now, do you remember, we talked about this before, but do we remember how we're going to be able to tell when we're done working with this? When we've gotten all
the border?
Yeah, we're looking at this border. So we're going to be looking for when the top border, I think it's called Excel edge top, let's give it a shot. So I'm going to loop until s.cells, row number R, column number 1, dot borders. Might have to actually record this to get it, but let's see. Excel edge top dot line style is different from Excel none. UNTIL. I'm just going to ask, let me just take this code, I'm not quite sure this is right. Let me just take this and ask it about the active cell. Oh, good. So that's telling me that right now it's 1. If I'm on a different cell down here, it should give me negative 41, 42, which is Excel none. Good, so I think I got that right on the first try, which shouldn't be too impressive because I just did it like a half hour ago. So I still feel pretty good. That's a long block of code with some different things in it. Now, remember that we're going until we find the cell with the top border. Here's the problem. We're starting on row number 6. As soon as we hit row number 6, what's the top border?
There's a border.
What's that?
Well, there's a border.
Yeah, there's a border. But look what happens in the code. So we're going to process this line. So we're going to do whatever we do with that line. We're going to increment R by 1. So by the time I ever check this, what's the first cell we're going to check it on? We're going to check it on this one. So we're making the assumption that we've got some data here. It's a pretty good assumption. In fact, we only have 48 files here. How many states do we have? 50 last time I checked. Why do you think we're missing 2?
There aren't universities in those states?
I don't know. There's probably universities in every state, I'm guessing. But for whatever reason, the FBA doesn't have data on it. When there was no data for that state, they didn't even give us the file. So assuming that there's at least one record here is probably a pretty good assumption. Because otherwise, the file wouldn't even be. So we are making that assumption, but I think it's a pretty safe assumption. Okay, so now that's pretty good. I'm going to have to be executing the query inside this loop. So let's just do this. Let me do a debug.print of our column 1. So when I run to here, that should scroll off the names of our colleges that we have in California. There's Allen Hancock. Cal Poly. So that looks pretty good. But now that I've built this loop, I'd like to be able to get it around my existing code that defines the query and executes the query. I don't want to close the connection inside the loop because I'm opening the connection to the database, I'm processing a whole bunch of queries, then closing the connection. So I'm going to open the connection outside the loop. I'm going to close the connection outside the loop, but the rest of the stuff's going to come inside that loop. So close stays out. I'm going to bring the rest of this up inside the loop. Put at the end. I still got a bunch of work to do before it, but this is going to be what I do at the end of this loop. So let me see if I can show you the way it is now, because that was a lot. Look at it, it all fits. R equals 6, do, and loop, and then I've got the existing block that we had in here, defining the query, getting the query formatted, printing it, and then, of course, executing it is currently disabled. How are we doing so far, folks? Questions?
So we move on the compose SQL from below to the loop.
Yeah, everywhere it says compose SQL to the execute SQL. We're putting that inside the loop.
And we still keep that execute as a code. Why?
Yeah. Execute's a comment here. It's just because I don't really need to be execute. I mean, I could be putting this into the database. It wouldn't hurt. But I know it's not ready to go into the database right now. I'm printing out the SQL so I can take a look at it and see, is this getting formatted the way that I want? Is the state going in where it belongs? Is the year where it belongs? And so forth. What you're going to find out is that while you're building the queries, the SQL is not going to be in an executable state for most of the time. And so it's good to put up on the screen, take a look at it, and then you can go, oh yeah, I'm missing the quote here or whatever. It's just to avoid the actual error that will happen when I try to execute a bad query. All right, so now I got to get the campus name. I already have a variable for campus. In fact, I just printed off those campuses. So let me come here and say campus equals, and I'll read in the value for the campus. I'm sorry, not campus, the school. I'm going to go ahead and parameterize school. So I'm going to come take University of Utah, change it to a parameter for school, do a replace, now if I run this, it should print off several queries, each one with a different school in place. Let's take a look. So let me stop my code, clear out my immediate window, and so yeah, I've got lots of queries now. Let me go over and take a look. Okay, this looks pretty good. I've got Allen Hancock College. I've got Cal State Poly. But now I've got a problem. What's the problem? Let me move on my data.
You have blank.
Oh, this is one university with 2 campuses. It only shows the university name once. What am I going to do? Any thoughts? By the way, typically, in years past, this would have just been a project you'd been working on when you came across this. You have to think of something. What are you going to do? Go ahead.
If the cell to the left is empty, go to the top, go n.xlr.
Okay, so if I get to a cell here that's empty, problem is...
You're on a cell to the left of campus.
Over here? No.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So if it's empty, because that's cell 9, go back up.
9?
San Luis.
Oh, 8, yeah.
The cell to the left is empty, then end XL up, and it will go to the 7.
That sounds pretty intriguing, except if I do an end XL up...
Well, that's how, but in VBA it will go to 7. I did the project already.
Oh, you already did the project?
Yeah.
And you're staying around here? I'm honored. You like the class so much, you've already done this. Very good. So I think that would do the trick. There's a simpler approach. Go ahead.
Save it at the top of the loop, and then don't reset it if the value is empty.
Okay, I like this approach. So what we're saying is that when I'm looking here, if I look at these queries, or this SQL that it created, some of these were just zero-length strings. I said, I've got a single quote, and I've got my tag in there that I'm replacing. I replaced that tag with a zero-length string. Those quotes then bump right into each other. And so what Blake has said is, listen, if the thing's blank, don't change it. I mean, the last one you wrote was Cal Poly. If the next one's blank, just don't change it. Leave it Cal Poly. So I like it. Let's take a look. So let's come here and say, here's where I'm changing the school. I'm only going to change the school if the thing I'm looking at is greater than a zero-length string. So if that cell is greater than a zero-length string, then, oops, not question mark, but greater than, then read the value. What's it going to be? I mean, so that means sometimes I'm not going to even hit this line. So what's school going to be if I don't hit this line? It'll be whatever it used to be, whatever it was last time through the loop. The good news is, there always is a school right here. Because even if it's a multi-campus school, it's got to have the campus name in the first line. So now, that should be it. All I have to do is say, hey, if there's a value there, that's the value we want. If not, don't touch it. So now if I run this, I want to close this. California, don't save. It seems like I want to save this one before too long. Database 2 underscore winter 18. Okay. I'll run this again, process data files. And so now let's take a look at the queries that it wrote. And yeah, we've got University of California on every one that's supposed to be University of California. That's great. Looking for the top, Allen Hancock College, Cal Poly, Cal State University. It's filling in every time. That's good. Okay, questions or a particular part of the code you want to look at?
Could you back up to your if statement?
Is that what you need to see?
No, so mine's a small question. I thought, so when we just wrote that if statement, I thought for some reason that every time we do the if, we have to do an end if. Is that not the case?
It is not the case.
Okay.
So the special case of the if statement is if I only have one statement to execute conditionally, I can put it right after the then.
If it's on the same line.
It has to be on the same line.
Got it.
Yeah. If I put it on the next line, then I've got to have an end if. Yep.
How does the greater than work with a string?
Oh, good question. How does the greater than work with a string? Let's take a look. So if I were to look at capital A is greater than capital B, what do you think? True or false?
False.
Well, those are both speaking strings. Which one do you think is bigger, A or B?
B.
Yeah, B is bigger. So let's flip this thing. That's true. The reason that works is because I can ask for the ASCII value of capital A, and I can ask for the ASCII value of capital B, and numerically, capital B is higher. So it's actually just looking at that location in memory. These are stored as numbers anyway. It's just looking at that location in memory and going, oh yeah, one of those is bigger than the other.
And so empty string is the smallest of all.
Empty string is the smallest possible string. You don't ever have to ask if anything is less than empty string. There's nothing less than empty string.
Oh.
It's a trick. Okay. We got 5 minutes to go. What do we want to cover? One of the things that we're going to have to deal with, I think we can probably do this in 5 minutes. One of the things you're going to have to deal with is that colon on the end. You don't want that colon to be on the end of your data. Sometimes you also have footnotes, like on the state name or the school name. And you don't want to have to deal with anything that's non-alphabetic at the end. I want to be able to look at a string and say, listen, if there's anything at the end of this that's not a letter, just get rid of it. So let's write a function that will do that. So I'll let me stop my code. Make a function. I'm going to call it chomp. Pass some data to it. I'm just going to return. I'm going to pass a string. It's going to return a string. I'm going to go through this so that we can do it in the next 4 minutes. You may not follow it exactly as I'm going, but you'll have the code to be able to kind of poke it. Mx as an integer. For x equals the length, I'm going to go from the last character in data down to 1. To go backwards, I've got to tell it to count backwards, so step -1. I want to know if the very last character, so if mid of data starting at the x position and taking 1, I want to know if that is in the valid range for letters. We have is numerical, tell us if it's a number. Is there is letter? There's no is letter. But fortunately, this same thing that we have here, let's just look at the difference between capital A and capital Z. That's between 65 and 90. So I can just ask if that, actually let me look at the uppercase of that. I don't have to worry about lowercase or uppercase. I'm going to uppercase it here. If that is greater than or equal to a capital A, and it's less than or equal to capital Z, then I know I found a letter. What do I want to do if I found a letter? I want to set chomp equal to the left of data, the x number of characters. And I'm done. Exit function. So this is going to start at the end. If I pass it in 10 characters, let's just take a look. Print chomp E5 1 2 3 4 5 6 or whatever. If I pass this in, so look at that, it's going to ask, is that in the alphabetic range? It's going to say no, so we keep looping. X gets smaller, X gets smaller, X gets smaller. It's going to get to this I. Is that in the alphabetic range? It'll say yes. So at that point, X would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We take the rightmost 5 characters. We send them back. I'm sorry, the leftmost 5 characters. We set that as a return value, and we're done. So that should just print E5. If I have a school name with a colon at the end, it should just come back without the colon. And so let me go ahead and instead of chomp, there's several places I could do it. Let me just do it right here where I'm replacing the SQL. I'm just going to pass school down to chomp. And it'll take off any trailing data, trailing non-alphabetic data. And so now if I run this, it should, I'm not sure what I just ran. I'm in the process of running it, whatever it is. We're in the right one. Okay, type this school. Is school not a string? Oh, I never declared school. I did campus, I meant to do school. Yeah, so it's not a string. What is it? Yep. Apparently there's no option explicit at the top here.
There's not.
So I'm going to go ahead and, for myself, I'm going to put option explicit. I'll reset my code. Let me run this again. And so now I should have gotten rid of that colon at the end of University of California. So, from here, most of the issues we've dealt with. We've got this issue of null, which I'd hoped to talk about. We didn't get to it. Null is a reserved word in SQL. It means the absence of a value. I'm going to leave that blank. If I put quotes around that, what's going to happen? I'm going to put NULL into the database. I don't want that. I want to leave that part blank. So this is a little bit tricky because you've got to have the quotes there if there is a campus, but you can't have the quotes there if it's null. So what that means is you're not going to build the quotes into the query. You're probably going to build the quotes into whatever you make campus to say. So we have to check and see, is there a value for campus? If so, put that value and put some quotes around it. If not, then just put null. So you need to do a little work there. I think we've got you going down the road in the right direction.
So where did you declare like what school value school did?
The question is, where does school get its value? The answer is school gets its value right here.
Oh.
All right, I'll post this video. I'll post this code. It will be a good place for you to start. Don't actually download the file and start there. Work with the one you downloaded, but just copy this code in. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed.